after party, Monday morning after party, and that's 11 a.m. And it's call-in. The link is in the description, and that's where we take your calls. So what's better than, I consider call-in a continuation of the hottest party, and then it turns into an after party. And it's especially fun because we're still celebrating Aaron's 1-week-old birthday.
We are? Okay.
Oh, yeah.
That's news to me. Well,
Yeah.
we also could celebrate the beginning of the spring season. So happy equinox, everybody.
Yeah. Happy equinox.
So much to celebrate. But so much to not celebrate in the world, as we're about to find out from the one and only Chuckster. So let's hit it.
Let's hit it.
And a good Sunday morning. Brace yourself, folks. It is going to be a whirlwind of a week. It starts with the Russian president. He's hosting Chinese President Xi Jinping in Moscow. It's a pivotal moment in the war. That meeting's on Monday. China is considering whether to arm Russia because Russia's in desperate need of munitions for the war. TikTok CEO.
I don't think China's considering that. The U.S. has said that China's considering that, but the U.S. has also said they have no evidence of that. So I don't understand why Chuck is asserting that China is considering arming Russia when China at least hasn't said that.
Yeah, but Aaron, it's kind of the CPB, the China playbook.
Chinese playbook?
Yeah, Chinese playbook. So, yeah.
You know what, Kay, it's really funny. I'll have to find this quote, but there was an article in one of the main U.S. papers where some U.S. officials said that it's a classic Chinese playbook to put out a peace plan right now. That's what they said, or
really?
something like that. Yeah, yeah.
There
I'll
you
find
go.
it. Yeah, the Chinese playbook. So basically, the U.S. playbook is anytime they want to accuse their adversaries of doing anything nefarious, the rule is it's always out of their
playbook,
like the blank playbook, the Russian
playbook, out of the adversaries' playbook. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So classic Chuckster playbook right here, just to repeat what anonymous U.S. officials are saying. All right.
Under pressure from the Biden administration, which is threatening to fully ban the world's most popular app in this country, will be testifying on the Hill this week. And already, former President Donald Trump is attempting to create a circus-like atmosphere, hijack the media narrative, calling for protests ahead of what is an expected indictment sometime this week. It would be the first indictment of a former U.S. president in American history. But we're going to be...
Chuck, I mean, don't you think that you take part in this Trump circus too, maybe a little bit, by talking about him constantly? And
the walls are closing in, Aaron.
The walls are closing in. I mean, sure, yes, Trump is a self-generated circus, but does he not have a little bit of help from people like the Chuckster? I think that's that's a little unfair. I think Chuck is selling out Trump a little bit there. He's throwing him under the bus.
Yeah, and he's also throwing himself under the bus. He's denying himself the credit he deserves as a participant. Yeah, he's selling himself short.
This is not a one-man show.
Yeah.
Begin with the economy. 3 years ago this week, we probably need a little perspective here, folks. The world began a complete shutdown. Countries began sealing their borders, and social distancing became a catchphrase. This impacted our economy. 3 years later, after 760 million reported COVID cases worldwide, nearly 7 million deaths from the virus, we'd all like to memory hole COVID. But the fallout has been impossible to ignore. 47% of Americans admit it. They say their lives will never return to pre-pandemic normal, according to Gallup. Inflation, of course, has been a big fallout from this shutdown, and it remains stubborn. Government data on Tuesday showed the prices continued to rise in February. The Fed, trying to slow the economy gradually to curb inflation, has been raising rates at one of the fastest rates in decades, pulling back on so-called easy money policies. Supply chain has been slow to recover. The unemployment rate is super low, 3.6%. But millions dropped out of the workforce. Labor force participation rate is well off pre-pandemic highs, and we have a labor shortage because of our strict immigration policies in this country. And now the U.S. economy, which has remained resilient despite all of these challenges, is facing this new test, a crisis in the banking sector, after the failures of Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank. On Monday, ratings agency Moody's cut its overall outlook for our banking system from stable to negative. Markets had a volatile week, down on Friday as regional bank stocks continued to slide. The Fed is also going to be meeting this week, and they're going to be considering another rate hike. Washington is divided, though, about what right now can be done to stem this crisis.
I'm going to ask Congress and the banking regulators to strengthen the rules for banks to make it less likely this kind of bank failure would happen again.
But it seems as though the regulators didn't do their job. I don't know they need new legislation.
Of course he's going to say that. No, because he doesn't want regulation, obviously, or anything strengthening regulation.
It's a deep divide between Joe Biden's cosmetic regulation and Kevin McCarthy's no regulation.
Right.
Yes.
Those are our choices. Welcome to America. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well,
let's see.
Speaking of divide, there's a big divide right now, supposedly inside the Republican Party. Because one of the Republican frontrunners, Ron DeSantis of Florida, has apparently been, mildly critical of U.S. policy in Ukraine, and so other members of his party are rebuking him for it. So
yeah, and here's what I just want to make sure people know what happened. So here's what Ron DeSantis said about the war in Ukraine. He said, while the U.S. has many vital national interests, securing our borders, addressing the crisis of readiness with our military, achieving energy security and independence, and checking the economic, cultural, and military power of the Chinese Communist Party, becoming further entangled in a territorial dispute between Ukraine and Russia is not one of them. So let's see.
So, and by the way, and just to point out something, like, this was taken as some huge break from the proxy war consensus. If you read his statement carefully, he's really not saying anything too bold. Michael Tracy's pointed this out, that really DeSantis is not actually saying anything all that different from what the conventional Republican narrative is. He's offering a little bit of criticism, but ultimately he's just saying we shouldn't become further entangled in this dispute.
Further, right, exactly. He's not saying we should pull out of it.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
So
we're already arming the crap out of Ukraine.
Yeah.
It's not like, right. Yeah. But he just actually said that further entrenching ourselves into this is not in our national interest. Yeah.
But that's basically the Biden administration's official policy too, is we shouldn't become further involved. We just should stay involved at the same level, which is massive. And DeSantis wasn't criticizing that. And the reason why he's saying this is basically because Trump has been taking the lead once again in sort of claiming to be anti-war, anti-interventionist. He did the same thing in 2016. Of course, when he came into office, he appointed a bunch of neocons and pursued a neocon policy. But, so I think DeSantis recognizes that Trump's rhetoric has an appeal to the voters in the Republican Party. So that's what he's trying to do here. Yeah,
exactly. And also, if you want to see Aaron debate Christian Parenti on that point, on just how much of a neocon Trump was, you can do that at usefulidiots.substack.com, because we had him on last week. So it's a great time. It was a great time for all.
So Senator Mike Rounds of South Dakota, who's a Republican, he's not happy even with DeSantis's mild criticism of the proxy war. So here he is.
Let me move to what I started our conversation with in introducing you, and that was Governor DeSantis's designation of the war between Russia and Ukraine as a territorial dispute. Do you agree with him?
Look, I don't think it's a territorial dispute. While he may be taking territory, and it's technically accurate to say that there's territory being taken, this is bigger than that for us. I focus on what our major issues are. And number one, China is our near-peer competitor. They are our focus right now. Russia is right behind them. But in this particular case, you have a couple of items that bring it all together in the big picture. Number one, when we pulled out of Afghanistan the way that we did, that sent a message to both Xi Jinping and to Putin that we were withdrawing from the international scene, and that maybe they could test the waters about whether or not we would actually exercise our capabilities internationally in the future. So taking out the issue of Afghanistan, and then moving into the fact that Putin now tests the waters by walking in or attempting to take over a sovereign state right next to them that we had back in 1995 agreed that they would have sovereignty over that specific part of the land. Well, Xi Jinping looks at that and says, I'm going to watch this very carefully, because Xi Jinping would like Taiwan, and he's already committed that one way or another he's going to get it back. He wants to see how we respond and whether or not we can keep our allies together, whether or not NATO stays together, or whether or not it strengthens NATO. So this is a bigger picture than just...
What's that board game that like political people like to play? Is it called Risk?
I think so.
This is called Risk, I think. I mean,
Candyland.
Candyland. it's like, so all these people are talking as if this is like a game of Risk. Like we can't show weakness over here because that that allows our enemies to take territory over there. Like none of this has anything to do with Ukraine. He's talking about Afghanistan, how that made us look weak, and we have to look strong to China. Like basically, they really want to impress China, I guess, or look tough around China, and that means we have to fund a proxy war in Ukraine for some reason.
Right.
It's nothing. None of it has to do really with Ukraine, except for his latter point, which is about an agreement reached in the mid-90s in which everyone agreed to respect Ukraine's sovereignty. No need to go in that history now, but it's just everything. It's never just about the issue itself. It's always about sort of maintaining control everywhere else.
Right. Yeah. It's always about China, Iran, Russia. Yeah.
Yeah.
What they're going to take away from it.
So in short, Senator Rounds wants to send some more rounds of ammo.
Oh,
to Ukraine.
wow.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
That was well done.
Yeah. Well, that's good stuff. Okay.
Yeah. That's good stuff. Well, now we can turn to a Democrat and hear what he has to say about Ron DeSantis' comments about Ukraine. Let's hear what he has to say to Jake Tapper.
Governor Ron DeSantis this week said that the war in Ukraine, he described it as a territorial dispute. He said that it's not a, quote, vital national interest for the United States. You're on the Senate Armed Services Committee. Do you agree?
I was shocked. I think it's stunning for the Florida governor who's running for president to say this. I mean, and what is he saying it for? To get votes? I mean, what happened to, Ronald Reagan's peace through strength? I mean, we need to show Vladimir Putin that it's unacceptable for him to invade a neighbor. This is in our national security.
Remember, they like to say neighbor because that distinguishes what Russia did from what the U.S. did in Iraq.
You can't invade people on your border. You can only invade people who are around the world, like Iraq or Syria.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, the U.S. has invaded Panama, which is technically on its border. It's pretty close.
Pretty close. It's really not hospitable to do to your neighbors. It's really a question of etiquette and rudeness. You have to be a good host. You can't invade your neighbors. You can invade people who live in other neighborhoods. And not to mention all the, it's just rude to put sanctions on neighborly countries too. But Mark's not concerned with that.
Security interests for him to lose. We can't allow him to be successful. If he's able to, take Ukraine and win a war in Ukraine, who's going to be next? It's going to be one of our NATO allies. And then we're going to be putting, U.S. soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines in harm's way. We don't have to do that right now. We need to make sure that Ukraine wins this thing. And Vladimir Putin and his cronies are held accountable for this.
Yeah, now all we have to do is put Ukrainians in harm's way.
Right.
And sacrifice them like cannon fodder in order to bleed Russia as long as possible. And again, the idea that if we don't do that, then Russia will somehow invade a NATO country.
Right. Finland's next.
It's just insane. There's no evidence of that whatsoever. This isn't, this erases the actual history of Ukraine, over the last many years now, which we talked about a million times. A coup, a civil war, the U.S. helps fuel, peace agreements that aren't respected by the Ukrainian far right and their allies in Washington. And here we are today. And all that's, of course, missing here. But anyway, great to see that Democrats and Republicans have something to agree on, which is a candidate like Ron DeSantis offering a really tepid criticism of the proxy war, and everybody jumps on him for that.
Well, another thing that they agree on is how great the Gipper is, Ronald Reagan.
Oh, they love the Gipper.
And speaking of Ronald Reagan and all his glory and greatness, here's a gem that we learned from the New York Times, but also Meet the Press. Let's hear what we have to learn about Reagan right now.
Mr. Baker, you had an incredible scoop for it. And it would have been huge news in 1980. And I'm sure Jimmy Carter, who may be watching now and absorbing this right now, obviously he's been in hospice care, and a suspicion that the hostages were held up from being released for politics. You've got confirmation from a former Democrat.
Yeah.
And this is in Iran, the Iranian hostages, the Iran hostage crisis.
No, it's interesting. For years, of course, the Carter people had suspected something happened there to keep the hostages in Iran until after the election so Ronald Reagan could win.
They were released on
Investigations-
January 20th,
they
on
were
inauguration day.
minutes after
That was always like,
inauguration.
what's your evidence? That.
Yeah,
It was always-
exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. And there were investigations, though, and books written and so forth, and nobody ever actually kind of proved it. But we now have testimony from an on-the-record source, Ben Barnes, a former Texas lieutenant governor, a very widely respected Democrat in his state, powerful figure in his time, tells us that he took a trip in the summer of 1980 with John Connally. John Connally had been the Texas governor and a Republican presidential candidate, Secretary of Treasury for Nixon. And during this trip around the Middle East, that John Connally told all these Middle East leaders, get a message to Iran, tell them to hold the hostages until after the election. Reagan will be better than Carter. And we've never had an on-the-record source like Ben Barnes telling us a story like this before. And most intriguingly, he says that when they get back from this trip, they meet with Bill Casey. Bill Casey was the campaign chairman for Ronald Reagan. Now, we don't know that Reagan knew anything about it. We don't know anything from Casey. His past, Connally has passed. Obviously, we cannot really verify the story 100%. But Ben Barnes has a lot of credibility, and it's hard to imagine why he would make this up at this point.
It's astonishing, and we wonder, Carlos, very quickly, why Americans believe conspiracy theories.
Well, I mean, because, and people point out in the comments, which that people have been saying this for years, and yes, it's true that they have. This is just a major confirmation of it. And you wonder why Americans believe in conspiracy theories, as the Chuckster says.
Well, I mean, to answer Chuck's questions, because people like Chuck
There
Todd
are
push conspiracy theories constantly,
right.
like Trump is a Russian agent and then Iraq has WMDs. Those are the official
yeah.
conspiracy theories that they promote, or that Hunter Biden's laptop is the product of Russia. But anyway, look, what's funny about this story is that the Reagan, apparently his envoy, apparently convinced, or someone working in the interest of Reagan, convinced Iran that Reagan would be better for Iran than Carter was. So if that's true, well, here's how the Reagan administration rewarded Iran. Again, assuming this is all true, they supported Saddam Hussein, gave him chemical weapons, which he then used to gas and murder thousands of Iranians in their war, which the U.S. fueled to basically, to huge disaster. It was a major disaster. So that's how the Reagan administration rewarded the supposed Iranian help in defeating Jimmy Carter.
Right.
But I wouldn't be surprised if the story is true. But by the way, all this nostalgia now for the Gipper, like what would Ronald Reagan say about the Republicans who are mildly critical of the proxy war? Honestly, I hate to say this, but the Gipper was better on Russia than either of these wings, these establishment wings of the Democratic and Republican parties, because at least he negotiated with the Soviet Union. He negotiated a really important arms control pact called the INF Treaty, which Trump destroyed and everybody else ignored because now it's cool to be a Cold War hawk again. But Reagan actually negotiated treaties with Russia. So I think actually Reagan, for all his crimes, was more pro-peace than either of the establishment wings of both parties are right now.
Very scary statement, but true. Well, we have more history related news based on the United States treatment of countries in the Middle East whose names begin with I, or two syllables, and end with a consonant, and actually begin with IRA. And let's take a look at what we have coming at us about the Iraq War. Happy anniversary, everyone.
We mark the 20th anniversary of the beginning of the war in Iraq. It took just under 7 weeks to wrap up the initial military operations, but the last American combat troops did not leave Iraq until nearly 9 years later in December 2011. Vice President Dick Cheney joined the...
And again, people in combat, U.S. troops in combat are still there. They just got reclassified under a new name so that they wouldn't be called combat troops anymore.
Yeah.
So it's technically
rebranding.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
The broadcast just before the invasion, and Bob Schieffer asked him how long he expected the war to last.
And I think it'll go relatively quickly. But you
weeks,
can't
months,
count on that. Weeks rather than months. There's always the possibility of complications that you can't anticipate, but I have great confidence in our troops. The really challenging part of it, to some extent, may come in the aftermath once the military segment is over and we move to trying to stand up a new government and turn over to the Iraqi people.
Our Charlie D'Agata was in Iraq for CBS News when the war began. He went back to bring us this report.
Shock and awe. The U.S. military's term and intent for the aerial bombardment that began the war. But the takedown of Saddam Hussein's regime triggered a savage insurgency and a brutal sectarian conflict. A tragedy that cost the lives of hundreds of thousands of Iraqis and nearly 4,500 U.S. service members.
I love the way it's a tragedy. It makes it sound like a naturally occurring, like something that happened unrelated to the fact that we invaded.
All those U.S. troops who invaded were just carried there on a giant tsunami wave. It was,
right,
they were here in the U.S. at their bases. They got lifted up by a tsunami and carried around the world, and they crashed into Iraq. It was a huge tragedy. Iraq,
and that provoked a savage response.
Yes, the savage. Yes.
Savages. Yeah.
Of course, that's a really good thing to pick up on. He wouldn't call the invasion savage.
Right. Of course.
It's the insurgency that developed after the invasion. That's savage.
Yeah. The natives.
This is Baghdad today. Gone are most of the cement blast walls and barbed wire. Amid the capital's bustling marketplaces and cafes, something else has returned, a sense of optimism. But threats to Iraq's security remain, not least from its powerful neighbor Iran, which continues to increase its influence, with political parties and powerful paramilitary groups tied to Tehran.
How dare Iran?
That's a threat. Sorry. It's not the invasion that was a threat to Iraq's security.
Yeah, how dare Iran take advantage of the U.S. invading its neighbor and overthrowing a government that was actually very hostile to Iran. Saddam Hussein and Iran were not friends at all.
As we know, because we helped one side.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, yes, that the threat is from Iran. It's not from the U.S., which refuses to leave Iraq, even though the Iraqi parliament has asked it to leave. And when the Iraqi parliament asked it to leave, the U.S. threatened to freeze Iraq's bank reserves unless they retracted. And so the U.S. is still there.
By the way, shout out to very handsome man and very good meme artist, Qasem Soleimani, who Trump took out. You can see him standing. I mean, you can see his image. He's the man without the hat in the background.
And by the way, this correspondent for CBS, he's the same guy who talked in the early days of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. He's the one who said that we're not used to seeing a civilized white country like Ukraine being invaded.
Right.
So
he was part of that chorus of racist anchors who are shocked to see blonde hair, blue eyed people.
Yeah. So this is very on brand for him.
Yeah, this is.
Baghdad, you'll find billboards and banners like this honoring the memory of Qasem Soleimani, the top Iranian general accused of killing hundreds of American soldiers during the war and considered such a threat. He was killed in a U.S. airstrike here in the city in 2020.
I love the way.
Do you want to know like what Soleimani was doing when he was
killing
killed?
ISIS?
When he was killed by the U.S., he was there on a peace mission. He was actually trying to broker rapprochement between Saudi Arabia and Iran, which just happened in a deal brokered by China. So something that just happened, a peace deal that just happened between Iran and Saudi Arabia. That's what Qasem Soleimani was actually trying to pursue when he was killed by the U.S.
Right.
Yeah.
And note that he is very much, obviously, basically speaking for the Trump administration or speaking for Trump when he's saying he was considered such a threat that we had to take him out.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, you saw when he was killed, hundreds of thousands of people in Iraq and Iran went out to the streets to honor him because they saw him as a hero because he oversaw the fight against ISIS, which was a threat to Iranians and Iraqis as a result of the U.S. invasion of Iraq. And Qasem Soleimani helped defeat ISIS and even work with the U.S. in doing so. But once he became inconvenient and, because you had powerful people like Sheldon Adelson, who was a major Trump donor,
R.I.P.
pro-Israel lobbyist, despised people like Qasem Soleimani. He was taken out. That's why he was taken out.
Yeah, and it's just disgusting the way it's presented, not as an example of. I mean, what's interesting is that this is something that, unlike other foreign policy, like interventionist moves by Trump, that were embraced by Democrats, or when Trump tried to pull out of Syria, we saw people on both sides of the aisle opposing that. This was an example where some people were like, "Okay, Trump, this is too much," but not Agata, not this guy.
I'm really focused.
We put the question to U.S. Ambassador Alina Romanowski, who's visiting Washington, D.C.
But Iran has proven in the past to make this a very difficult place to operate in.
By the way, I just want to give him a shout out for the little mullet in the back.
He's saying Iran has made the Iraq a difficult place to operate in. Yes, a difficult place for the occupying force to operate in.
Well, again, this goes back to the principle of neighborly hospitality, and it's just rude of Iran to be doing this to its neighbor.
Right. Iran is Iraq's neighbor, so Iran has to stay out. It's only the country that's not Iraq's neighbor, which is the U.S., which came from thousands of miles away.
Right. That's okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
The Iranians have made it a difficult place to operate and have contributed to some of the insecurity, but I do think that this is a sovereign decision that the Iraqis need to sort out with their neighbor.
This is all about, the U.S. has always really respected the sovereignty of Iraq. Yeah. Nothing respects the sovereignty of Iraq. No way to show that more than by invading them.
A lot to sort out. Iraq is recovering from decades of war and sanctions, and widespread corruption continues to plague the economy despite booming oil revenues. But Ambassador Romanowski believes Iraqi leadership has turned a corner.
I think you have a government that is committed to, improving the lives and the...
By the way, I just want to say, when we have a guest on Useful Idiots and they're looking at their computer, we tell them, put some books under that laptop so you're not looking down. I think these people have the staff to do that. Just a little technical note.
Yeah. Also, when he talks about Iraq is recovering from sanctions, he doesn't mention who imposed those sanctions, like as if that was another naturally occurring phenomenon. These sanctions,
they were also blown in, but through a tornado.
Blown in. Yeah. That was Madeleine. That was the U.S. and that was Madeleine Albright saying the price is worth it to kill hundreds of thousands of kids with those sanctions. Which always gets omitted from these retrospectives on Iraq. All right. Well,
let's just finish up this clip. Let's see what the final things that we learned from it.
Services for Iraqi people.
Iraqis tell us what they want most is for this fragile peace to remain and hope that prosperity will come.
Oh, that's what the Iraqis are telling you? None of them are telling you that they want us gone?
Did they interview an Iraqi in that piece we just heard?
Aaron, you got to trust. You got to trust. It's like you got to have faith. You don't need to see the evidence.
Yeah,
it was probably a vibe. I think it was a vibe.
I mean, he showed some close-ups of average citizens on the street.
Talking.
Right?
Right. Yeah, but no speaking.
Yeah. But I guess he can intuit on their behalf what they really want.
By the way, can you imagine doing an entire clip as Margaret Sullivan did on the Iraq War, showing Dick Cheney and not mentioning the fact that no WMDs were actually found there?
That's a good point.
It's such media malpractice to omit that.
Yeah.
I mean, you show Cheney, then you say, of course, Cheney and the Bush administration do your thing where you don't even say they lied, just say that they were wrong. I mean, you should say that they lied, but you can't even say that they were wrong, that the premise of the war was false. Yeah. It's disgusting.
They were complicit in that, so they don't want to remind their audiences.
They helped sell it. Yeah.
All righty. Well, okay. So TikTok.
It's time. It's time. It's TikTok. It's time to go now to a clip about TikTok. Sorry, I had to give you that segue.
Yeah, that's good. That's great.
Well done. Yeah.
A little update on TikTok. TikTok CEO, Carol, I know you have some important news here, is going to testify this week to try to save his company from an American ban. It's pretty clear the politics. He is China's actions in Moscow has only made his job, I think, impossible. What should we expect?
Well, it's not going to be a friendly crowd, obviously, but one of the things, so currently TikTok says it has 100 million people in the U.S. who are active, regular users. What I'm told is that the CEO is, when he testifies on Thursday before the House committee, that he's going to say that number is now jumped to 150 million users.
Why is that
and
relevant?
So that's relevant because as Washington sort of figures out what to do with TikTok. They've had this review, national security review going on for 3 years. Congress is trying to figure out what they want to do with it. It's just becoming more and more entrenched in Americans' daily lives. And so one of the things you're going to see TikTok do is pull out a lot of stops this week. They're bringing these creators to Washington, and these are people who are small business owners, entertainers, things like that. And they are going to make an economic argument. So they're basically going to say, here, look, if you ban TikTok, that's going to hurt us financially because we rely on TikTok to basically build our businesses and things like that. And so
even though there is YouTube and there are alternatives, it's going to be a tough argument.
TikTok
to make.
has a big reach, so they're trying that. And then just if you look at these numbers, Chuck, they're young. It's like 31 is the average age, and so that, politically speaking, could hurt Democrats if there was a ban because younger voters are more likely to support Democrats, and so it's very fraught.
Can you imagine that? It's such a sad statement that the way Democrats can get young voters is by not banning TikTok.
Yeah, I mean,
that's what they're offering, potentially, and they may not
I
even do that.
I kind of want them to go ahead with this ban of TikTok because, I mean, what if this galvanizes millions of young people against the Cold War with China, which is really what this is about. The U.S. can't stand that a foreign company has had success in the U.S. because the U.S. actually hates the free market. The U.S. wants to control the market, and if it doesn't, it mulls banning apps that are too popular. And in the name of this being some kind of security threat, is that the Chinese government cares about what kids in the U.S. are talking about online. And so I don't know. I say go for it. Try these kids. You know? And maybe that will show people the absurdity of trying to dominate the world and trying to have a Cold War with everybody.
Yeah, do it through TikTok. Reminder: we got to get on TikTok, Aaron. We have to start doing dance videos.
All right. So H.R. McMaster is the former national security advisor under Trump. He's one of these people. Again, Trump campaigned against like the national security state, and he was going to be anti-war. But then he came on into office, and he appointed people like H.R. McMaster, who are right from the neocon establishment. So here he is now sharing his wisdom on Russia on Face the Nation.
Saw these images of Vladimir Putin defiantly traveling to Ukraine, his first known trip to the occupied Donbas region of eastern Ukraine. The Kremlin made a point to say he visited children's centers. This is days after an arrest warrant was issued on charges of abducting and deporting Ukrainian children forcibly to Russia. How do you interpret this?
Well, I think this is a moment.
Let me say that this allegation that Russia's abducted kids from Ukraine, looking into this more, the only source for this is some kind of State Department funded group. So I'd be very skeptical of this allegation. And what it sounds like to me is, again, I don't want to rule anything out. But what it sounds like to me is basically Russia is either taking orphans and moving them to families in like orphans in Ukraine and moving the families in Russia, or it's just helping to unite people like children with other family members inside of Russia after evacuating them from war zones inside Ukraine. This idea that Russia has this mass program of abducting children doesn't fly. And the only source I can see is a State Department funded group. So I'd be very skeptical of it.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's from the Aaron Maté playbook.
To be skeptical, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, that's true.
Of clarity. I mean, look at just the brazen cynicism associated with him going to Sebastopol, which he illegally annexed in 2014, and then to Mariupol, going there at night, visiting sites, the few sites, that hadn't been rubbled, by the Russian military as they inflicted murder on the innocent people in Mariupol. And as you mentioned, he's just been indicted by the International Criminal Court for kidnapping, tens of thousands of Ukrainian children. And of course, this is all on the eve of Xi Jinping, visiting Putin. So I think what you're seeing is really quite clearly this axis of authoritarians who are a real threat to freedom.
It's so cool that on the 20th anniversary of the Iraq War, which was sold to us, by using the term axis of evil, which Iraq was a part of, now we get a rebrand, we get an update. We got the axis of authoritarians.
Right.
And now Russia's a part of that. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, they joined AA.
Yeah. But what a great way for neocons to mark the anniversary of the Iraq War, than to give us an update on some of the propaganda that was used to market the Iraq War, just with a slight spin. It's a perfect way to celebrate your really Iraq War 20th anniversary. Yeah. From the same crowd of neocons who unbelievably, I mean, it's amazing that all these people still have a public platform. They sold us the most disastrous war of this century, as they acknowledged earlier, hundreds of thousands of people killed in Iraq. Of course, thousands of U.S. soldiers too. And the same neocons that sold us that war are now dominating the agenda in both parties, Democrats and Republicans, because this is their proxy war now in Ukraine. So happy anniversary to them. I mean,
happy anniversary. Thank you.
They have to look back on this with just this is an achievement for them. Yeah.
And it's so great, and the media doesn't tell, and they get to enjoy the media, the same media that sold the war, now whitewashes history. No one has to deal with the fact that there weren't WMDs. No one has to deal with the fact that we destabilized that region. Created a lot of instability, violence, numbers that we haven't even really dealt with, and probably the estimates are probably low. So
someone in the chat says that the neocons are the assholes of evil, and hey, that's pretty good.
Yeah,
that's pretty good. I like that. All right, let's go to more from HR McMaster.
Government admits they know surveillance footage or things used for enhancing targeting in the battlefield is being sold by Chinese companies, but they say no lethal support yet has happened. You're saying you don't believe that?
I don't believe that. I think what you're going to see in the coming days and weeks is more and more evidence of Chinese support. China doesn't want to get caught doing this, right? Because at the same time as they're helping the Russians murder Ukrainians, they're also saying, hey, China's open for business. And they're trying to appeal to American and other investors to continue to prop up their statist mercantilist model, even as they commit genocide, even as Xi Jinping, just in the recent People's Congress last week, he gave really 4 speeches, essentially preparing the Chinese people for war. I mean, these were jingoistic speeches. He also made it clear that the security economy is going to dominate, over the free market economy or the tech sector. And so I think it's time for us really to assess the degree to which we have been over many years underwriting in many ways our own demise, with investments in China and really not doing more to shore up fragile supply chains. We've essentially given an authoritarian regime coercive power over our economy.
I want to ask
much like Europe did with Russia.
Wow. We've been sowing the seeds to our suicide mission.
What did he how did he describe China's economy? He said statist, mercantilist.
Yeah.
That does not roll off the tongue.
No, it doesn't.
Mercantilist.
Yeah. We'll throw back to Adam Smith.
Yes.
Nations.
But again, it's the U.S. right now that is, basically, the U.S. has a problem where U.S. corporations on their own, China didn't force them to, the U.S. corporations chose to deeply intertwine themselves with China, rely on its supply chain, exploit its cheap labor. And China has taken advantage of that because U.S. corporations went there. And so that was their decision. And now the U.S. officials are angry about that, and that they want to roll all that back because they hate the free market unless they can control it, which is not a free market at all.
Right.
And then, of course,
they like the myth, the illusion of free market. Yeah. And then now they're talking also about, we don't have any evidence that China is going to supply Russia with weapons in Ukraine, but we think probably are. And again, I don't know whatever underlying evidence they may have, which we haven't seen yet. But what we do know is that this allegation that China is about to get involved in arming Russia
It happens to have been rolled out right as China has been unveiling a peace plan inside Ukraine. So,
but as we'll see shortly, the U.S. is very much into peace in that region. There's
oh
nothing
yeah,
we want
well,
more.
let's jump to that.
But
Let's
before
go.
I just want to say one thing, which is that I do
Yeah.
think that, you said that U.S. corporations weren't forced to do business with China. Aaron, there's something called Stockholm Syndrome. When you start identifying with your kidnappers. And I think maybe that's what the U.S. is going through.
So China's kidnapped the U.S.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, fair enough.
Yeah.
Well, John Kirby is the spokesperson for the National Security Council, and he faces a problem right now, which is that China is unveiling a call for peace inside Ukraine. They're proposing a ceasefire, and the U.S. Doesn't want that. So let's go to how he handled this under questioning by Fox News.
Now, John Kirby, the National Security Council's coordinator for strategic communications. Welcome back to Fox News Sunday.
Good to be with you, Mike. Thanks.
So let's start with the Russian jet and the American drone. The Russians have suggested maybe it was accidental, but then the defense minister is giving out awards to the fighter pilots. What's the latest in your view?
We don't know what the intention was of the Russian pilot. We can't really get inside in between his ears to figure out if he meant to hit that drone or not. It was absolutely unprofessional and way too aggressive flying on his part. Clearly, he did clip the propeller of that drone, forcing us to bring it down into the Black Sea. So aggressive, unsafe, unprofessional, reckless, quite frankly.
Okay, so
is anybody going to ask the question, why was a U.S. drone flying over the Black Sea? Which
I don't think so.
In Russia's neighborhood, right? Does anyone ask that question? Like what the drone was doing was collecting intelligence to give to Ukraine for the proxy war. So that's the U.S. acting as a belligerent, or it's the U.S. just trying to provoke Russia into doing something like this. I don't know. But certainly no one ever asked the question, why is a U.S. drone flying over the Black Sea to begin with?
Right. Well, it's funny.
Yeah.
Well, H.R. McMaster's Masters was saying how China's giving these jingoistic, nationalistic speeches, and of course that's what the media does for the U.S. government. Just sets up these jingoistic, nationalistic contexts where you just never question what the United States is doing. Yeah,
exactly.
And yeah, someone wrote, same people who shot down a weather balloon.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. Yep.
There are reports this week that Chinese companies have shipped assault rifles, body armor, and drone parts to Russia. This on the heels of China, Iran, and Russia holding joint naval exercises. Chinese President Xi is traveling to Moscow tomorrow. It feels an awful lot like Russia and China are trying to chip away at America's superpower status.
There's no question that both China and Russia, and this is right out in the national security strategy, are two countries that are chafing against this international rules-based order that the United States and so many of our allies and partners have built up since the end of World War II. They don't like that. They'd like to rewrite the rules of the game globally, and they have been increasing their cooperation and their relationship, certainly of late. China has not condemned Putin's invasion of Ukraine. They are still buying Russian oil and energy resources, and they have at least given tacit approval because they've taken the Russian claim that this is somehow an existential threat against Russia, that the war is the West's fault. So we'll watch what comes out of this meeting here Monday through Wednesday of President Xi to Moscow, the state visit, if you will. But what we have said before, and we'll say it again today, that if coming out of this meeting there's some sort of call for a ceasefire, well, that's just going to be unacceptable, because all that's going to do, Mike, is ratify Russia's conquest to date. All that's going to do is give Mr. Putin more time to refit, retrain, reman, and try to plan for renewed offensives at a time of his choosing. We hope, and we've said this before, that President Xi will call and talk to President Zelensky, because we believe the Chinese need to get the Ukrainian perspective here.
Great pun
Incredible.
from user Pals here. Kirby your enthusiasm. Yes. John Kirby's trying to curby his enthusiasm for peace in Ukraine, because he comes out and says that a ceasefire is unacceptable. When the U.S. line is supposed to be that it's not for us to dictate what Ukraine should do. This is their sovereign decision.
Right.
until a proposal for a ceasefire comes along, now that's unacceptable.
Right. Yeah, just saying the quiet part out loud, saying that the part that we've all been saying, not all, but a bunch of us have been saying, which is that the U.S. is intent on not ending this conflict, not saving the lives of civilians, not saving the lives of Ukrainians, but gaining as much geostrategically as possible.
Yeah.
Or in what they would consider to be geostrategic gains, which is weakening Russia. I mean, can you imagine pretending to care about the lives of Ukrainians while also saying a ceasefire, literally stopping the fire, is unacceptable?
Well, it's totally in line with their policy. Before the war, rejecting a Russian peace offer, that was just premised on basically Ukraine being neutral, not joining NATO, and rolling back some NATO weaponry and NATO troops. And then after the war, all those negotiations that were blocked, as multiple people have spoken to, including the former Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett most recently, and the Turkish Foreign Minister, the U.S. blocking these peace talks. So this is perfectly in character.
Yeah, and of course Boris Johnson going to tell Zelensky not to negotiate with Putin.
President Xi, there's been a tease of a phone call between President Biden and President Xi for weeks, but you've said just recently that there's not a phone call in the works. For diplomacy to work after the U.S. shot down the spy balloon and try to get an idea of what China is thinking at this point, don't they need to talk?
The president wants to keep the lines of communications open with China, and you've heard him say it himself just in recent days that he does want to set up another chance to talk to President Xi, and I suspect that will happen. It'll happen in due course when it's the appropriate time to do so. It's important, particularly when the tensions are so high between our two countries, that these two leaders keep that line of communication open, and the president's committed to doing that.
China is increasing its defense.
But they weren't so committed to dialogue to go ahead with a meeting between Blinken and his counterpart after the weather balloon was over the U.S. Remember, Blinken canceled his trip to China after the weather balloon?
Right.
So I don't know. Their commitment to diplomacy is pretty fickle, I would say.
Yeah.
All right, let's move
Diplomacy
on.
and peace, they're not really into either of those things.
Let's move on. Let's go back to Senator Mark Kelly, who has of Arizona, who has more thoughts on that horrible incident where Russia dared to down a U.S. drone over the Black Sea.
Let's turn to the war between Russia and Ukraine. You said the collision between a U.S. drone and a Russian jet was a combination of aggressiveness and incompetence. Senator Marco Rubio, the Republican vice chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee, said it's a test for the Biden administration, that the U.S. should fly more drones in that area, potentially flanked by fighter jets. You were a Navy pilot for more than 2 decades. What do you think of Senator Rubio's idea?
Well, I don't think we should be intimidated by the Russians or deterred from what we think is the right operational approach to this. We shouldn't pull back our MQ-9s that are flying in the area. But let me reiterate that the Russians here have shown how reckless they are, how incompetent they are. I flew with, Russian pilots in the backseat of my NASA jet for, decades. I flew in space with Russians. I'm not surprised by this. I mean, I flew with Russian pilots, fighter pilots who couldn't fly formation. And I watched this video, and it's pretty obvious what happened. He lost sight of it, and he crashed into it. He didn't do it intentionally, but it was reckless, and it's incompetence that we see on the battlefield every day in Ukraine, and that's why the losses that the Russians are suffering right now are really high. At this point, I mean, the best choice for Vladimir Putin would be to say, hey, this isn't working, and he's got to stop this illegal invasion. And I mean, it's horrific what is going on in Ukraine with war crimes, and he's killing women and children.
Wow. He really threw those Russian pilots under the bus.
He did. It sounds like he had a bad time with them up in the air.
I know.
He did not enjoy their journeys up in the sky, and shots fired.
Yeah, big time. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Mike Pence. Let's. I mean, he's a potential candidate in 2024, so he's making the round.
Yeah.
And the big news right now is that Donald Trump might get arrested this week in the hush payments investigation. So Mike Pence has thoughts.
Trump is saying that he's going to be indicted on Tuesday. He's calling for people to protest. Now, we don't know if that's true. The Manhattan DA has not said anything about it. But he's calling for people to protest. Is that irresponsible?
Well, first, let me say I'm taken aback at the idea of indicting a former president of the United States. At a time when there's a crime wave in New York City, the fact that the Manhattan DA thinks that indicting President Trump is his top priority, I think, just tells you everything you need to know about the radical left in this country. The last 5 years, Democrats have been dismantling tough criminal justice in the city of New York. Families are paying the price, and yet this is what we get. It just feels like a politically charged prosecution here. And I, for my part, I just feel like it's just not what the American people want to see.
But he's
way to go. Way to tie the potential indictment to the culture wars.
Of course. Of course.
Well
Doesn't
done.
he? Don't you think he'd be a great actor? Like, if that was an actor saying all those lines exactly like that, wouldn't you say that's a fantastic actor? That's a very good, convincing, slimy politician. Disingenuous.
Oh, right, yeah.
Because everything he says sounds so fake and forced.
Right,
So it's like,
right.
why not just be an actor?
Right. Like he's a terrible actor in terms of sounding like he's sincere, but he plays a sleazy, like, fake politician. Well,
He sounds so fake. It's like it's dripping off of his face.
Yeah.
Everything is contrived.
So gross, yeah.
There's
Yeah.
no, so why not just become an actor rather than put yourself in this this horrible field of being a politician? Especially when he had to be Donald Trump's vice president, which is a pretty humiliating job. I mean,
Right.
Kamala has it tough too, but to be Trump's vice president as well and pretend as if you think Trump is like a devoted Christian and a great guy, and then and then Trump encourages people to protest against you, or to hang Mike Pence, like whatever that line was. Man, tough job.
Yeah.
All right. Oh man, can we take more of Mike Pence? I mean, he's tough. I find him hard to listen to.
I know he is, but it's part of our job, Aaron.
All right. Well, let's go to the next clip, because there's still tension between Pence and Trump over January 6th, obviously, and they got to work it out in public.
Election.
Yeah.
So let's turn to the next election. You're here in Iowa. Are you running for president?
Well, we're giving serious consideration to it, John, and we're getting a lot of encouragement, not only here in Iowa, but all across the country. We're giving prayerful consideration to what role we might play. But I think now is a time for all of us that care about this country to consider our part, to play a part, and to make sure that we elect leadership at every level that'll turn this country around in 2024 and beyond.
You said previously that your decision would come by spring. I know it doesn't feel like spring out there, but Monday is officially the first day of spring. What's your timeline?
Well, I can tell you we're getting closer. We've been spending time with our family. And we've been listening to friends around the country. And
by family, he means political consultants paid a lot of money to weigh his election prospects. That's what he means by family. Yeah.
Well, to be fair, he does mean he's talking to both his wife and his mother, because he does call his wife mother. So
I forgot about that. That's right.
Yeah,
That's
he's giving
right.
prayerful. I like this term, prayerful consideration.
I expect before too long we'll know what our calling is, and I promise to keep you posted.
Thanks, Mike. Mike's a convert. He was Catholic and he became an evangelical. By the way, yeah. Anyway, well, we're gonna have to do some of these, I think, maybe for Thursday Throwdown, because we have so many great clips. We didn't even get to all of them. But we do have to wrap, and we want to thank everyone for coming. right? And we also want to make sure that people remember to come to the call-in.
That's right, which will start right after this ends. And go to usefulidiots.substack.com for more. And thanks,
Also,
everybody.
thank you, Wadesworth, for your very generous super chat. And make sure that everyone has liked. If you haven't liked this stream, what are we up on? What are we at likes? Wilson.
I'm seeing 842 right now.
Oh my God, guys, we got to get to 1,000. You see, this is what happens when I don't chide you midstream.
Katie was being nice for Aaron's birthday week.
Yep. Come on,
At the end of Aaron's birthday month, she's gonna stop being nice at all, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah. Don't make me do it like every clip. Don't make me do it. Where are we at now?
910.
All right. We're gonna get there. Also, everyone, make sure you sign that Roger Waters petition that we mentioned last week, where he's
we're past 950.
I'm gonna stay on till 1,000.
Katie, what's that Roger Waters petition about?
Oh, yes, that Roger Waters petition. I'll put the link in, but that Roger Waters petition is about Germany literally canceling a concert, a Roger Waters concert that he had already sold a lot of tickets to, that people want to attend. And he's been smeared as a great anti-Semite by the German government, of all people. The Germans are going to lecture him about anti-Semitism. And what's especially ironic is that Roger Waters himself, he opposes anti-Semitism and all forms of racism and bigotry. His mistake is that he criticizes the Israeli government and defends the human rights of Palestinians. And but another irony is that he lost his father literally died fighting Nazism. And these Germans are going to tell him that he's an anti-Semite. I'm also putting the link in there, but and he is Tim Wilson taking legal action, but we have this petition, and you know what? We're at 9,839 signatures. Let's get to 10,000. And where are we on likes, by the way?
We got to 1,000.
All right, thank you.
We did it.
Yeah,
we did it.
Yeah, we did it. All right. Well, we will see you. Oh, and if you sign the petition, you'll be in great company. You'll be signing a petition that Susan Sarandon, Cornel West, Peter Gabriel, Gabor Mate, Chris Hedges, Bob Scheer, Glenn Greenwald, David Cross, a lot of Julie Christie, the great Julie Christie, have signed. So make sure you sign it. All right. We will see you at Call-In. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everybody.